You are listening to the Overfunctioning Leadership Podcast, learning leadership concepts through life experience. Well, hello, friends. Welcome to another podcast sponsored by Overfunctioning Leadership. I'm Alex.
I'm John.
And I'm Zach.
I'll be the guest today. I'm Jarrod.
Oh, Jarrod. Jarrod, what's your last name, sir?
Jarrod Williams.
Oh, Jarrod Williams. Jarrod Williams, where are you from?
Originally from Pittsburgh. Made my way over to Ohio and been in Ohio for about 20 years now.
I think this is our first guest that's out of state, but in this state.
Really, he's in-state. He's an in-state guest.
To be clear, I did not drive many hours to get here for this podcast.
I've made that drive before. It'd be worth it.
So, John, could you who are we sitting here with? Since you,
so this is Jarrod Williams. He's a associate pastor at Redemption Chapel, and Jarrod has a number of functions at the church. And so he's going to talk a little bit tonight. We'll get into our podcast topic, but Jarrod is an avid reader and is a person that leads a number of different ministries at our church. So we're excited to have Jarrod with us tonight.
Awesome. Yeah, and tonight's episode is number 31. So, John, whose episode is this?
This would be in honor of Steve Olin, may rest in peace, the former Indian reliever who died in a tragic boating accident a number of years ago.
Yeah, was that in Florida, right?
He was.
Oh,
yes.
Man, in the 90s. 94?
Yeah.
93?
Mid-90s.
Okay, anyways.
Yeah.
So is it always in Indian? How does the number work, or how does the...
So
is it any athlete, or how do you get the...
Well, he just asked me. I just know jersey numbers.
Jersey numbers.
So he's
not particular sport, or
just
No.
You
Some
throw
of
the
the
number out. I can.
some of the examples were his player from his church softball league when he played, or one of his jerseys from Mogador, his away jersey.
Yeah.
So if
From
this
his
was
middle school.
episode 75, it would be...
Mean Joe Green.
That was quick. Nice.
He's on top of it.
He knows it. So, anyway, before we get into our topic today, which actually will be leading without being in charge, so that is what we're going to be talking about today, perhaps we should recap. And so last episode, we did willpower. And I brought this up because I've been thinking about it, and we talked internal and external willpower. So internal willpower will be about what?
What is your barrier to entry to doing the thing that you're doing? How much are you providing, and then how much are you externally controlling that, such that you're minimizing the amount of internal willpower that you need?
And then John, you talk a little bit about external.
Yeah, I think of the external willpower piece of a particular leader of a system who tries to get people to do certain things, and oftentimes their answer to that is to yell, tell, and sell, or actually it goes the other way. I think it does. Tell, sell, and yell. How's that sound? Sound
Great.
better?
That sounds great.
Yeah, I guess you can do them in any order. None of which is very effective, by the way, no matter what order you do them in. But trying to exert will on the system oftentimes involves a burnout leader.
Yeah. And then actually, Zach, you made a real poignant remark on the last podcast about how if you decide that you want to force some other people to do something, then your internal willpower actually goes up, and there's a lot more at stake. So if it doesn't go well for you, then you are in big trouble. So if you want somebody to do something and they don't do it and it doesn't work out, then
You're risking it for the biscuit.
yeah. Yeah. So anyways, so that was willpower. And so now we're going to go ahead and flip over to Fable. So we're going to get out the juice boxes, maybe Capri Sun, maybe juice. Capri Suns are always hard to get those stupid straws in, so I like the juice box.
I never have any issues.
Okay. Wait, I'm hoping that's a blanket statement.
Yeah. No
Okay.
issues. Yeah.
So anyways, actually, our guest, Jarrod, has a Fable, so we're going to bring it over to you.
Yeah, it's funny as I think of this, how to lead when you're not in charge. I've been chewing on this recently, probably because I'm not very good at it. I was asked to read a book on this, so I think it's something in general that people can wrestle with. And when I think of this, I just think of, as John mentioned, associate pastor now, but, like a lot of guys jumping into church work started in student ministries. And I just remember particularly the church I was at was going through some transitions, kind of up and down, season for a while. And I just remember all the youth guys, particularly, me and a buddy, we would sit up in the youth room and just talk about, man, if we were in charge, here's what we do. And it was so easy when you're not in charge to know what to do, But whenever you're the one pulling the trigger on some things, it's a whole different ball game. And so, yeah, I know it's easy, at least for me, to fall into that trap where I'm not in charge, but if I were in charge, and I would know what to do. So, yeah, when I think of this topic, that's initially what comes to mind. Just sitting up, complaining about not being in charge, and if I were in charge, it'd be this easy. And never seems to be that, actually.
So let's kind of look at that real quick, just right off the top. So if you're leading without being in charge, which we'll get to in a second, but I mean, we experience this all within any system we're in, is this complaining piece. And so that you could always do things better. So within a systemic, where does that come from? So how is that anxietal? How does that all flow through things?
Yeah, I'm just thinking of the question, when you're not in charge, and the example that Jarrod shared in the fable, is it that the leadership is incompetent? They're just not, knowledgeable about how to make good decisions? Do they not have the will to pull a trigger when they should? Or is it maybe a lack of information on the part of the people that are sitting in the audience, if you will, or maybe not directly knowledgeable about the entire scope of it? I'm just wondering where that comes from. As far as, because it seems like it's just not youth group work, but you have students that complain about teachers, or you might have an employee complain about a boss, so this seems to be I don't know if systemic's the right word, but it seems to be pervasive in some level, and I'm wondering what's behind it.
Yeah, because you'll get this. I mean, with kids with their parents. I mean, it's the one down relationship, right? Where in a lot of ways you complain what's going up. So
is it incompetence? We say that's what it is, that the reason that people that are not in charge maybe have difficulty with those that are in charge, could it be about the person in charge is just feckless and just not very good?
I think
feckless. Wow, yeah. That's a good word. I wasn't expecting that.
I'm also wondering, we've all heard we talk about adaptive versus technical. I think that's the comparison. One of the technical ways that people try to address this sort of issue is to say, instead of telling someone what to do, let me ask them. And so you see that with parents and children a lot. I've seen this in my siblings, but also in myself. There were times in my life where my mom would tell me to do something, and I'm going to do it regardless, but I wished it had been phrased as a question. Would you take out the trash, instead of go take out the trash now? And how much control is it that I wished I had as compared to just that obedience?
So incompetence. It could be an incompetent leader? I
think it could be. I mean, was my mom incompetent? Oh no. Check it out, next podcast episode.
Or you could actually, I believe I interviewed her.
Yeah, don't check that out
on YouTube. So you could even just look at her then and
check that out and see my incompetence.
I feel like it's easy for me to understand as well. I mean, you talk about anxiety, why that posture would produce such anxiety because I mean, so much of my complaint is dependent on somebody else. I'm giving all of the outcome, all of the control to somebody else. And of course, for me, man, that even just saying that makes me feel anxious of, man, if they don't do this, they don't do this. And I have zero control over the outcome of this. I'm putting none of it on me and all of it on them. And so, man, I could see how that would cause anxiety in me.
I think through the SCARF model, we've talked about the SCARF model before from David Rock and his work in neuroscience leadership, that, if you go down the acronym, Alex, I know you like acronyms so much, the A part of autonomy, the S part of status. So when you're in a one-down relationship, you're of course, that's the status piece. The uncertainty, you mentioned that lack of control, that ultimately the decision relies on somebody else. So perhaps the systemic phenomena going on is that in all the scenarios that were shared earlier, that people that are in a one-down relationship lack status, lack certainty, lack autonomy, and perhaps because they're not in charge, They think they lack. It's unfair. It's a lack of fairness. So that may be something that's going on that leads to that increased anxiety.
So, Jarrod, it sounded, if I remember correctly, things were happening at your church that were different from what they used to be. And is that when you started, like, you had this conversation with this other guy about, like, this complaining? You said things were changing.
Well, changing, yeah, I mean, I feel like it was always changing, but I think particularly the setting I was in, I mean, the church was really floundering, so there was change of leadership, but, you know, I mean, kind of church world, attendance fluctuating is a big deal, so I think, you know, there were some issues, and, you know, the church was in a spot where I think it was floundering a little bit, so, yeah.
Would you say that it was because, like, you just weren't used to the new leadership? Like, so when it comes to systems, right, they're always used to a certain thing. So they'll have a certain homeostasis that they settle into, and they're like, we are used to this type of leader. And then when you have a change, I just wonder if that was part of it. It has to be part of it as well, wouldn't you say? Like, since you had somebody new in there who's doing things differently, may it make you feel uncomfortable?
Yeah, I don't know. I have to think about it. I mean, that doesn't, you know, initially hit me like, oh yeah, there was a massive change. I think I disrespect most leadership I'm under, so I don't know if it's it. No, no, I don't know. Yeah, I don't. There definitely were. I mean, looking back on it, there definitely were numerous changes in leadership. You know, so I'm sure it played a piece.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about homeostasis a lot and how people just generate a certain base level of anxiety anytime things differ from what they're used to. So the fact that there was frequent change, that you mentioned multiple leaders, like, that's not good for a system that's used to people coming in, changing everything, it not working out, and then leaving. You know, that almost sets you up for a system in which you're going to put in your input, because you know that regardless of what you say, there's a chance that this person's going to leave anyway, and everything is going to be different later.
Yeah, I would say that in some ways, John and I, more than me, and I don't know, I'm not sure how much you, Jarrod, but like experienced different forms of leaders coming through our profession. So John and I've had 3 different principals. John, I'm not sure how many principals you've had.
I'm going with 6.
6. And then Jarrod, how many different people have you had in charge through your career? I mean, on a guesstimate scale.
Well, I think the church I was at, it was, kind of the 5 years I was in that particular role, it was 5 different bosses.
Yeah.
So there was, a fair bit of turnover. And not necessarily just at the top, but, my direct reports and all that. So there definitely was a lot of turnover, a lot of change in leadership.
Yeah. It just makes you wonder if, like, that's, since you know that's coming, maybe, then you're just like, well, this person's not going to be around very long anyway, so who really cares what they have to, you know what I mean? That can easily seep into a system which there's so much turnover. And I know that I felt it a lot at the school that we're at for a while, although things have settled down quite a bit now because of pay and other things. But
it's funny, though, part of where I'm at with this topic, that's just the name of a book I'm reading, How to Lead When You're Not in Charge, so I don't know if we got to give credit to somebody, but the main thing that I'm at least taking out of it now is that, feeling affirmed and just taking control of what I'm doing. But sometimes when I just look at the externals of that, like, I can just put it on that and make it a big excuse about it. Like, part of what I want to do is, okay, regardless of changing and regardless of what is in the system overall, I need to own what I'm over, And so I think that's the biggest thing for me now, of trying to think through not just making excuses for what's above me, what's out there. Okay, what can I control, and how do I, do the best with what I can control? So I feel like that's the main thing I'm chewing on right now.
When you're dealing with someone else leading too, specifically when you find yourself complaining, it seems, in my own experience, that often happens because I'm tying myself to certain expectations that I am not involved with at all. Like, I play no part in the outcome of the situation to meet or fail those expectations. And so, we talk about, like, so much of this is just learning how to manage your own emotional responses. When I say this, I'm talking about self-differentiation, Bowen's theory. How do you react when you encounter anxiety and stress? And so when you are creating a situation where you're tying yourself to an expected outcome that you are not a player in, like, there's a uselessness in that.
Well, like we were saying with anxiety, I mean, it makes so much sense. Like, I mean, even as you lay it out, I'm tying so much of my hope on something I can't control. Well, that's just going to bring anxiety, you know. I think I've just reread Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits, and he talks about kind of sphere of influence and sphere of concern, and talking about really, man, focus on my sphere of influence. But if I focus so much on just sphere of concern, but so many things outside of my influence, I mean, I think he's saying a lot of the same thing. I mean, that just, yeah.
Yeah. And then what's interesting too is that, like, so when you decide to complain, we all do it. I mean, the root behind the complaining, there's some part of this is just to get closer to somebody else. So if I complain to Zach about John, this happens before every podcast.
Every time.
I'm always last to get here.
Every time.
Or about my dog. See, we'll complain about my dog. Anyways, so we'll get closer together. You know, when you complain to each other, now our bond has become stronger, and it creates this triangle, which the third thing we're talking about goes further away. And so part of that is that you're trying to gain favor in some way with somebody else. Oh, we can connect this way. You know,
You're making teams.
Yeah.
Someone's going to win, and you want to be on the winning team.
Yeah.
Well, and I for sure think of the scarf model too, particularly status. Like most of the time when I'm complaining or putting somebody else down, it's to make myself look better. They don't know what they're talking about. What I'm saying, but I'm not saying out loud is, but I do, you know. I mean, anytime, we were talking about this recently, John, you know, just that anytime I'm complaining, putting somebody down, they don't get it. I'm letting everybody know, but I do. I mean, it's really, you know, and maybe that's part of the youth game, you know, I'm a youth guy, nobody cares what I say, but man, if I can put them down and make it sound like it, I think it really is a poor attempt to up my status.
And I think the journey of self-differentiation can help us be less likely to do that and be okay with the success of another and not be tied to outcomes, but just stay in my lane and focus what I can focus on and not be the circle of concern. Is that the word you used? Or the
I think it's sphere.
Sphere of concern, and which could fall outside of control, and of course would raise anxiety then when we start trying to do that.
It's funny when you say that. That definitely pings something for me of being okay with somebody else's success, and I'm surprised how much I'm not. And I think of particularly my anxiety coming. I heard somebody say it recently, but just a scarcity model. And I don't know, I just have, that's part of my worldview, that if they get success, if they succeed, then somehow I can't. Like there's only so much success to be had, and if their ideas succeed, that's less chance for my ideas to succeed. And I just have a view of just in a lot of different things. I mean, think of food, scarcity of food causes anxiety, right? Because if you get food, that means I don't. Well, I don't know that has to, you know, apply to success or recognition or, you know, but I do notice that so much. If somebody else, I mean, how pathetic is it in my world, you know, to where we're talking about like teaching God's word and giving a sermon. If somebody else gives a good sermon, how that'll have a slight negative twinge in my spirit. Because I'm like, well, no, people will think they're better than me. Like, oh my goodness, can I not be happy that like that person, you know, did well, but somehow it's like an offensive or, you know, against me. Mm-hmm.
Well, I was actually just talking with someone the other day about pastors and how when you have a lead pastor,
they're just pieces of work.
They are pieces of work. I'm looking at you and I can tell, but how different it is for that system, that type of system, because there are certain goals. Like you get this in a business, but because you typically have such a hierarchical system that's already so cog-like, everyone has their roles and their little subsystems don't change quite as much at the top. Like it takes a little longer to flow down. With a lead pastor coming in, whole missions can change that directly change like yours. Like you are automatically, as an associate pastor, you have to be on his team for his goals for that whole church, and how that's like a big bullet to bite.
That's funny. I would assume, why would that be the assumption? Like I would almost assume the opposite. For sure, as an associate pastor, you need to be on that lead pastor's team. So there is that you know, unique tie. But in some ways, I would probably assume the church has a similar mission that it always has had. Mm-hmm. And a company would be more prone to shift. You said cog-like. I guess I don't understand why would that be the assumption that in the church it would be more that way, more prone to be that way.
Part of what I think we were talking about specifically was the way that they're going to go about it and what they're trying to do. You aren't ever really on your own team, right? You're never like, you are always working to accomplish his overarching goal that could, I guess it's relatively subtle, but at the same time it might not be, for whatever happens as he comes into your system. So maybe he decides to, I mean, this doesn't happen all that often, but restructure, or let's say he wants to plant 5 churches in 5 years, and you're like, I don't know if we really need more churches in this area, but you're immediately on that same team. I know that what we were talking about specifically was at my church, we actually have multiple campuses, right? And there's a talk about how it's become more corporate just as a necessity to manage the relationships between those organizations.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, is there anything else added on to that?
I want to pose a question about success, and asking the question: is success a zero-sum game? In other words, does somebody win and somebody lose, or can we all be winners? And I think for most of us, success is a zero-sum game. And then what's behind that? What is behind? What's behind that?
Are you asking if we can have win-wins?
Yes, I'm asking if we can have. I've heard. We've all heard people say, you know what? I'm a win-win kind of guy. Well, who isn't a win-win kind of guy, right? I mean,
not me. I've always been a lose-lose kind of guy.
Yeah, right. World wars. This is a win-win for everybody. No, it's not. So, anyways,
you saying success in general?
Yeah.
I feel like the answer almost is easy to me. Of like the easy answer is, well, no, we could all succeed. But I mean, to me, then it is. But why does it not feel that way? You know,
that's my question.
Okay, so win-wins. I personally don't think you can have win-wins because within an organization in which let's say we're trying to do the same thing, or I don't know, we're going for the same goal, there has to be some sort of compromise between people to reach that goal. And inherently within a compromise, some person's not going to be able to put out their full ideas of what's going on. So like if Zach and I are going to we have this great idea to have this website, which we've talked about like 1,000 times.
Like 1.5 billion.
So I have my own ideas. Zach has his own ideas. But in order to come together to make this website, we're going to have to compromise. And he has some ideas he's going to lose out on, and I'm going to have some ideas that lose out on. So like inherently within that, it's kind of a win-win. But if really I'm looking at it like I'm losing some things and he's losing some things and we're pushing this together. So sometimes, I mean, without being self-differentiated, it could definitely seem like a win-loss. I just went in a circle. So I really believe in win-wins now? I still don't like them.
I always wonder how much of that is cultural as well. Because part of you think of that, I mean, particularly in American culture, right? I mean, number one, there's no other place. You're either first or last, and we're all about winning and being number one. I just wonder how much that colors our ability to see it, any other way, as opposed to, there's one winner and about being the best. Where maybe there is much more opportunity. It is less, zero sum than it may look. But I mean that's huge in our American value system, at least, of winning.
Maybe our Japanese listener will pipe in for us.
That'd be great.
We can only hope. I'll look at my phone and see if it starts ringing anytime soon. My thought is the whole war and battle metaphor. Like, lose a battle to win a war. And I feel like the win-win is, let's go with the website metaphor. when Alex chooses or I choose to lose some battles in lieu of fighting and winning that same war, aka putting up the website. But I think, to go back to your example, you're listening to someone give a bomb sermon and you're like fighting to put down that little voice in your head that's like little disappointed because you're like, man, I saw some things he could have done better, but he's still killing it. But like, you're putting down, there's that like little twinge of humility, and it's fighting to make sure that you're trying to win the same war. And sometimes we don't get into the nuances of that, where I might not even realize it, but part of my war is making sure someone else loses. And I think that's when you end up with the lose-lose. Like, I say that I want to get the website up, and Alex says he wants to get the website up. But if what I mean is I want to get the website up my way, then there's no real good compromise for the situation except for Alex to back down. And so I've just eliminated a ton of opportunities for us to come together and unite, because I'm choosing to win every single battle every time, which sets me up for a loss.
There seems like a ton of underlying tension with this website. And I feel like you just need you just fight out in the front lawn and get this over with.
That's the plan. Misha will be out there too, and she'll be licking us as we do it.
She's just playing the entire time. We're brawling.
Did you have a question, John?
Well, I was just thinking about the website example, and then I was thinking about
John's getting in on this.
and I'm drawing a parallel between that and leading when not in charge as an associate pastor, or so in both cases, nobody really has authority. None of you have a title that says, because of this title, this is the power that I have. And when one doesn't have a title, how do they influence another? And in comparative politics, you study the difference between authority and legitimacy. That a leader of a country has authority because they have a title, but they may not be considered to be legitimate in the eyes of the people because of decisions that they've made, et cetera, et cetera. So when I think about leading when not in charge, what do we do with this? How do we actually, unpack this and be able to have some takeaways? I'm wondering if we get away from authority. I don't have it, but you can still lead in that position by being legitimate in the role that you have and the expectations you have in that particular position.
So, this is the question. How do you do it? So how are we leading without being in charge? How do you lead? And I was looking at Roberta Gilbert's when she talked about, there's three things within a relationship. It has to be separate, equal, and open. Well, if you're in a one-down relationship, equalness can be very tough because, you're in a one-down relationship. So, how do you still stay equal in some ways? How do you still lead without having that title, without being in charge?
Well, and I think a big part of the takeaway is part of the misnomer you got to get at with that is as if there's one day where I'm going to be fully in charge. Like, you're always under somebody, So this magical, now I'm in charge. I mean, at every point, in the organization, I'm a lead pastor. Well, I have elders over me. If you have the elders over you, eventually even, the congregation is going to, in some ways you're answering to them. And so even the CEO, there's boards above them. So some of it is getting through that misnomer, and particularly everybody's leading something. I can't lead because I'm not in charge, but even in that situation, so I'm leading the youth group. So everybody is leading something, and back to that, sphere of concern. Okay, what can I control? And focusing on that. So I can get mad, if they would just push my event from up front, it'll do great. And then I kind of have a bad event, and then I just blame the leadership. What can I control? Making this event be fantastic. And maybe the leadership doesn't push it, and only 5 kids come. But those 5 kids that came would love it, and they're going to tell 5 more friends. And so the big takeaway for sure for me is whatever I can control, whatever part of that process I'm engaged in, doing that with excellence and not allowing me not being in charge to turn myself into a victim and then just being able to blame them as opposed to, man, what can I control?
Yeah, and it's not like a stick it to you either. Like, look what I did. Like I did this sweet thing, and I'm sticking it to you guys. I told you my stuff would be awesome. Like I've been there and done that too, where I put on some event and be like, yeah, oh yeah, you saw what happened right there, and you should have listened to me the first. You know what I mean? Like start building yourself up, but it's the posture that you take within that. So let's talk about that posture. Like so. You want to lead without being in charge. What is the proper mindset? Like, what can you do to start focusing on what you can control? Like, what does that posture look like? So as you go into each day, as you go into whatever you're going to do, what can you do to get there?
Well, I think Jarrod hit on a good point about inputs versus output, that I'm going to focus on the input of the situation and the planning and the hard work and what I can control. And certainly even using language with others to say, this would be helpful for me if you could do this, whatever it is. And they may choose to do it, they may choose not to do it. But I think if you frame it in that way, by giving them autonomy and allowing them to choose whether to do X or Y, but stating an I statement, Bowen theory talks about using I statements. This is what I think would be helpful. And then focusing on the inputs and realizing that there's part of stuff that's out of your control.
Zach, how do I do this?
I don't know. I'm still thinking through some stuff. Come back to me.
You're out. You lose.
I'm out.
Moving on,
and
Jarrod.
part of it isn't it, how do you frame leadership? And, you're talking about, politically, is it authoritative, or we say legitimacy? Is that the word you used? I mean, getting past the view that leadership is only a position. The only leadership is positional, leadership. Well, if, I've heard it instead of legitimacy, influence, similar idea of, if leadership is influence, I don't need to have, generally, even in the title of that book, leading when you're not in charge means not the person positionally in charge, but I can still influence. So even if I disagree with where things are going, did I do my part of stepping up? And this is difficult, stepping up to your boss and saying, hey, I'll follow you either way. I think this is a bad decision. Here's how I would do it. Now, it's much easier for me to whine about, how I would do it after it flops. It's much riskier, much more courageous leadership. Okay, did I try to influence it towards what I think is right? I may be wrong, but did I try to influence those who are in charge and tell them, hey, here's what I think is best? But still being united with the mission, not trying to, buck the system at all.
And I think that's a sign of a mature leader too. Right, is when...
Yeah, I've never done that, but it just sounds...
when
it sounds
You
nice.
read it in that book.
whose author we still have not named, and we won't until later. But that there's a mature leader when you offer an idea and they let you put your skin in the game, rather than taking your idea and running with it and then still continuing to assume all of that risk for that outcome, saying, hey, that's a good idea. Why don't you take charge? Why don't you put some skin in the game? Because that reduces that flippant complaining too, right? People aren't going to complain and say that they can do it better if when someone hears that, they're going to say, well, then do it better, right? That I don't know if that increases... It reduces anxiety because it gives people... Maybe it doesn't reduce anxiety, but it gives people an opportunity to hear their voice heard, right?
Yeah, they have ownership. So they start taking ownership of part of what's going on. So, you take the collective, instead of trying to do it all by yourself, then you take the collective, and then everybody has, as you said, skin in the game. So if it goes well, everybody feels great, and it doesn't go well, everybody can feel that too. So I'm not sure it would reduce, I think, the systemic anxiety, the chronic anxiety, I would think. No, not chronic.
Acute?
The chronic anxiety. Acute anxiety could still happen because it could be a bad, terrible, whatever. But as we talked a lot about in this podcast, reducing the chronic anxiety is going to be something that you should strive to do as a leader, because the acutes are going to come, and those are, and you can change some of that chronic to acute. But
and I think that would affect, for sure, those two would flop, because if you're telling me, if I'm going to my boss, here's what I think should happen. He says, like we just mentioned, okay, you're up, run with that. Like my acute anxiety is flying through the roof because now everybody's looking at me if I mess up. But like you said, overall chronic. I mean, part of the reason I just sit back and complain in some ways and don't speak up is it feels, definitely less acute anxiety because, well, I got no skin in the game and I'm just sitting back, complaining. But I think that chronic anxiety in the system of just it doesn't matter what I do and that my fate is in somebody else's hands. But I think it would flip those. But I think it would help. Yeah, for sure. The chronic anxiety, if I know I'm being heard and I feel like, man, I can have some say and control in my outcomes.
And part of that is your posture of going to who's in charge and saying, this is what I think about this. And, in providing that information to that person. There's a lot of fear and risk into that. But then even at the end, I remember doing this one time. There was something that happened at school. I don't quite remember. And look, I didn't go into this thinking this, but it just happened to be there. I did not agree with what was going on. And I said, I think this should be different. And I don't really agree. And I told them that I was angry with them. But I said at the end.
To your boss?
Oh, yeah. But I said, but I will do whatever you think is best. And still leaving it up to them because they're still your boss. But you can. I think there's a place where you can still you can correctly voice how you feel, but then also give them that affirmation of, but I still support you. There's still some of that. And they might not, they can just blow you off. But at least you know that you have dealt with the situation one-on-one right out front and say, this is what I think. And so, in an appropriate way and not a yelling or I know better than you. It's a tricky thing.
And a lot of that is that external willpower too. And it's kind of odd because it's that one-up relationship that you're not in direct control of. But there are times where you need external willpower and you're trying to have someone else change or do something because you view it as key to the success or the outcome. And sometimes that is part of the game. Like, you don't always have direct control over what needs to happen. You need to trust other people. And I think letting someone else lead, like being that good follower leader, however you want to call it, is making sure that you're picking those right battles. Because if you're picking those right battles, then it's going to succeed, hopefully. Mm-hmm. But follow that back to your convictions. We talk about convictions a lot. And if your convictions are fueling that willpower, if you're doing something because you believe in it, because you have a solid basis for it, then you're probably doing the right maybe not the right thing, but
it's your guiding principles. So,
yeah.
Your guiding principles can change. So as you're going through this and say, I go to my boss and I say, these are my guiding principles. And this is why I'm feeling you wouldn't say these are my guiding principles, but this is how I feel. You could say, but like, this is how I feel the situation could go. And they decide not to go with that. But having a conversation with them, your guiding principles on this particular topic could still change. And by having that conversation with your boss and knowing their background of why they decided that situation, you could go, you know what, I didn't see it that way, and now I understand. So my guiding principle on this, whatever we're doing, like I have a certain guiding principle when it comes to how students within a school should get tardies or I don't know, whatever, like discipline. But after listening to a person who is in charge, you might be able to change your guiding principles. So being open with that too. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm saying, be open, pick your right battles, and make sure that what you're choosing to fight for is something that you really believe in.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure.
So how do you think, to do that well? I feel like it's not an easy thing. We probably wouldn't be sitting here talking about it,
Yeah.
To influence a leader, particularly when you disagree. I think, Alex, you mentioned something that, that's great. Like, reminding them, like, hey, I'm on the team. I'll go with your decision. I think that's huge. What are other ways that, you feel like you can do that well or help you do that well with it not being an easy thing?
So it's been my observation, and it's not, I don't think, a stretch to say that we're living in an anxious society. And one of the hallmarks of an anxious system is the desire for safety over risk and the desire for certainty, and in an organization, the anxiety, if you could measure it in units of, 50 grebes or something like that, whatever unit you would want to measure.
50 grebes, that sounds like a lot.
Yeah.
50 grebes of anxiety. My question is, how many grebes, how many units of anxiety does the leader have? So if you have an organization of 10 people and there's 50 units of anxiety, does each person have 5 units each? Or do you think that some have more than others in general?
Or does the cup overfloweth from the leader down, trickling on down to the ones that they overlook?
Yeah.
Which then
I mean, the
could
leader
fill-
would have to have more, right? I mean, wouldn't that be the assumption that the person in charge that has the
I don't know. Has anybody been in charge of? Well, you mentioned earlier that
was in charge of something?
Yeah, you have been. So you said that if the leader said, "Yeah, go ahead and run with that immediately your acute anxiety would go up in anticipation of getting ready for whatever that is, right? So I think in that situation, certainly it's not evenly displaced.
Yeah.
And one could argue that at least the leader has a disproportionate amount of anxiety compared to everybody else. So if that's true, then how do people behave when they're anxious? Well, they tend to be, again, risk averse. They tend to look for certainty, which can look like do it myself because I know I can do it or I know I can control certain things. And it can look like black and white thinking versus looking at things more nuanced. So I'm wondering from a one down position, leading when not in charge, if I can somehow try to, with the leader, make them go from closed to a little bit more open by reducing the anxiety in the system, then the idea that I have, whatever it is, this is in the rational world idea, is going to get more traction because I thought about the emotional world first before I laid that idea out.
And that could look like, so you talked about how much anxiety people bring. It's their base level from their families, right? So there is definitely a time, there's definitely not a time to approach a leader. And I'm guessing that you probably know when those times are. So, leaders freaking out, probably not the best time to, hey, I got a great idea. How about this,
Then you walk into his office, see a desk fly out of the window. Bedtime. Okay, I'll come back.
So, Jared, you had a thought. Is that poking in there?
Yeah, I mean, it's just... So, I mean, part of, I think of good decision-making, poor decision-making in my own life, making just good, rational thoughts as opposed to emotional, and if anxiety is pushing me to just make emotional, bad decisions, I don't know, sometimes I feel like just acknowledging it, getting it out there, helps for me take it from the emotional to the rational. I was talking to a counselor of how, PTSD, part of what that is, trauma, you process in the emotional kind of adrenaline, anxious part of your brain. And part of the difficulty is it never travels to the rational side of your brain. So, classic PTSD in war, when you hear a pop, you need to run. But then all of a sudden you come back to the suburbs, you hear a pop, and it's not rational to think that's a gunshot, but yet you don't think rationally. So I think sometimes even, and maybe with a leader, just acknowledging and talking through the emotions of it can be helpful. I don't know, going to the leader, hey, I know there's a lot, I don't know, maybe just helping them talk it through, because I know in my life it helps take it from the emotional to the rational part of my brain. Because when I can move to that part of my brain, I instantly can start thinking broader. But if that's how we're built. And adrenaline, when that shoots up, which is a wonderful thing in a war or in an escape scenario or something, to hyper focus. But to make big decisions, we can't be myopic. And so how do we go from anxious to rational? Or how do you help your boss do that?
Well, I think you've hit on an important point. That is the essence of leadership, of being able to influence another person. And if I can help influence someone else to be a little more thoughtful with the way I come across, with having a sense of legitimacy because the sphere of responsibilities that I've done those well, I think over time that leading when not in charge becomes easier because the person becomes simply more open to the thoughts that you have. I've seen it work, and I think systems theory suggests that it does work.
And maybe it's not the same for every leader, because part of even initially asking the question of like, give me the 5 steps that I need to do to help my boss do my way, But as much as okay, and that's probably part of leadership too, of knowing the people you're leading. I think of fusion and cutoff, like each person probably needs something a little different. Somebody might need a little distance. Somebody might need a closer, to close that distance. And so maybe it's too simplistic to say, here's what you need to do to help your boss, as much as, okay, if I want to influence this person, what do I need to help them? And I don't know if that's the same for everybody.
There's not 5 steps.
Rats.
What?
What? There's not 5 steps?
I
There's
was-
not
I
an
was-
acronym that gives us the
Oh my gosh.
ways that we can support a leader?
I'll throw my head through a window if you have an acronym for that. Don't
There
even.
is an acronym, influence. I is
Oh, don't.
influence.
N is
N is
now.
non-negotiable. F is fairness.
We
L
are
is-
agreeing that there's more than 5 letters in influence, so I'm curious where this is going.
I don't even want to know where this is going because I hate acronyms. We are stopping.
We'll stop
I'm
there.
stopping this right now.
Just one other thought is, as a leader, and this doesn't really help answer our question, but
Great.
so I'm going to say it anyway. But as a leader, like, what sort of system are you creating? Are you creating one that's rigid and it's not allowing for other people to deal with their anxieties in your system? I think about, in a workplace or in a church or wherever you are, whatever your system is, you're bringing in anxiety from your other systems. And so that openness as a leader, giving people the opportunity to bring in multiple levels of anxiety, and like you're saying, John, help them think a little bit more rationally. What is the leader's responsibility to the people below them to redirect or rationalize their anxiety that's coming from other places?
So if I was gonna, recap this a little bit here, from what I've been hearing, here's some of the things I've been hearing. How can you lead without being in charge? Well, good luck. Number one, there's not 5 steps. This is a process, and a lot of it, from what we're talking about, is a posturing of, okay, what is my posture when I step into my system? What am I bringing to the table as far as my own anxiety? And is there a way that I can bring in less anxiety to the system and allow other people to also lower their anxiety by focusing on the inputs, being clear with my expectations, using I statements, getting closer to the leader. So if you want to influence a leader, who's somebody who's above you, getting close to them, being curious with them, asking them a lot of questions. You talked about helping them get to the rational world, asking questions about it, just being interested in them overall. And then there's some appropriate playfulness in there too of, having some sort of rapport with them as you ask them questions. People love to talk about themselves. So asking them about their ideas we all love it. I mean, and we love when people ask questions about us. So that seems to, and this is a long play. This isn't just like, okay, check that mark off and, I've got my curious out of the way and now we're moving on. This sounds like a long process. Yeah, I would say. Any other pieces or parts to recap of how to lead without being in charge? I mean, I think I did a pretty awesome job. And so if you have anything else, then you should probably be quiet.
And I was the very first thing you said
close.
in that, I think, was be aware of what you're bringing into the system. And I think that's what I was getting at before you recapped, right? Was just be aware of yourself and what you're bringing in.
Did he just rebuke you for an early recap?
Yeah.
That's what I was hearing.
You think you're in charge of this thing? I'm leading this. I'm driving this bus.
I'm just like thinking, what desk can I throw out of what window right now?
Okay, well, there's no desks in here
There's
at the
no
moment.
desks.
So
I
some
got
books.
a bowl for a cup.
Yeah, I know. I hope you like that. Anyways, okay, so I think that did a pretty good recap there. I believe we do have some things we need to talk about when it comes to social media and whatnot. You can listen to us on iTunes.
Google Play. Google Podcast, as we've sort of discussed but don't really know much about.
You can check us out on YouTube, see our pretty faces.
We got our Facebook. I don't know if we said that already.
And perpetually working on a website, which is fantastic.
But there's no anxiousness about that. We know where we stand. You know, it's my ideas, Alex's ideas, and they don't butt at all.
Yeah, it's mostly your ideas, and you don't listen to me.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
And Jarrod, thank you so much for coming on. We'd like to have you on anytime, not any day because we only meet on certain times. But hey, we would love to have you again. So.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah. So with that, I think we're wrapping this thing up. Do we need a shout out to Jesse Huffsteller?
Yeah,
Of course,
shout
he
out
makes our
to
music.
Jetler. You can find him on Spotify. He's released a little bit there. We sometimes post links to his stuff in our show notes. Sometimes. And you can contact us where, John?
At the of podcast at gmail.com.
Yes, that is correct.
That was great.
That's
yeah.
impressive. I know that.
He looked so confused as you said that. I was hoping for you to mess it up. I was really going to come down hard on you. Okay, well, anyways, with that, I'm Alex.
I'm John.
I'm Zach.
I'm Jarrod.
And we will catch you next time.
See you around.
Adios.